I've got some gear that doesn't have any stars on it. You guys know why. We'll get to that in a second. So, hey, thank you very much. Hey, I want to say thank you. Thanks for coming this morning. It's great to see y'all. It's I feel like I'm among my people. It's not too often that I get to Grantham, PA, except to watch some soccer games. But when Patrick and Jay invited me and said, listen, there'll be a Lottie Nelson breakfast, I'm like, I'm there. I don't know what you want me to do, but I'm there. I also want to thank Macaulay Asbury. Thank you for sponsoring this breakfast. Mark, thank you for exercising some discretion. We were teammates way back when, and there's some stories that I'm glad you didn't tell about those times. But thank you for your partnership with Soccer Shots. And thanks for the steering committee, the committee that puts this event together. It doesn't just happen. I know there's a lot of work that goes into preparing and organizing and executing. So thanks again. So this is proof positive that there was a men's soccer team prior to winning national championships. This is 1995, so a good 5 years before we won our first in 2000. So nobody on that team has a championship ring. I like to think that they're standing on the shoulders of giants, but I know better. But my experience at Messiah and with the program had a pretty significant impact on me and left, I think, an indelible mark on many of us, if not all of us in that picture. Got to play for Leighton Shoemaker, a mentor of mine, as well as Dave Brandt there on the left. But you can see there's a few people that I want to point out, some circles around some faces there. That's me in the middle row with what I thought to be cool soccer hair at the time. Jeremy Sorzano, one of my partners at Soccer Shots Franchising, has the best bowl cut money could buy. And Jason's the lightly complected one. He's squatting down there. Evidence that the sun didn't shine much in the fall here in Grantham. Now, there's a few bonus pictures that aren't circled. We've got another one that kind of matches the complexion of Jason, right over here, our own Peter Greer, and got Dan Wagner up to the top here. Dan, raise your hand, he's here too. Hi, Dan. There's Dan, and there's one other, Mark Heath. So Mark Beeve right there, that fierce face. So proof that there was a soccer team prior to winning national championship. Also proof that there wasn't digital cameras or smartphones. I'd take a picture of this on my plaque, which is actually a good thing. So it's interesting that Mark and Peter are here, as well as Dan, because they each lead organizations or leaders in organizations that have taken special, I'd say, attention to the topic that we're going to address today. And I stand here just with an admission, and it's this, is that I am not an expert. Patrick was right. I have not written any books. Peter, you ever written a book about culture? Not yet? You should. So I'm not hawking a book. If you're looking to get the most out of this experience, if you're like, oh my gosh, I paid money for this, if you need to go get a second helping at buffet, feel free. But I am a practitioner of this particular subject. And I would argue that, is there anybody here who's involved in a for-profit business? Anybody involved in for-profit? Any involved in a nonprofit? Okay. Anyone a student here at Messiah? Good. Anyone plays on a team or performs on any type of team? Good. Anybody a part of a family? Good. All right, good. Well, you should have checked one or maybe a couple of those boxes. And if you did, I would say that we are all participants, players in this thing called culture. And so I just want to share some of what we've learned at Soccer Shots, some of the things that we're doing to nurture the culture that we desire. And by no means have we mastered it. I think we continue to work it out and develop it. And so let's first start with just, what's the definition of culture? We're pretty simple guys. And we've identified that this is kind of our definition of culture. We probably shamelessly borrowed it from someone, but it's how we behave around here, okay? How we behave around here, pretty simple. And if you're interested, I put together a little sheet. You can follow along. You can write something in there if you'd like. If not, feel free to doodle, make it look like you're engaged. That would be great. But that particular definition, how we behave around here, I think is a great place to start. And the pronoun we is important. Obviously, organizations don't behave. Individuals and groups of individuals behave. And so that we just speaks to the collective nature of the group. And I think the here word, the here term, speaks not to geographic boundaries, but actually kind of the parameters of that group. So how we behave around here, just so that we have some common understanding of what culture means. And what is it? It's what's important. It's what's expected. It's what's celebrated. I say just as important as it's what's not tolerated. Okay? So, in addition to this, or just to kind of provide a picture, if this thing works, there we go. Picture of a garden. And when we think about culture, you have to know that like every organization has a culture, right? Think about the teams that you've been on, the businesses you're involved in. Every team has a culture. The question is it intentional or is it accidental? Now, this particular garden, these aren't gardens of mine, but we did try a garden, my daughter and I, and it looked more like this one when we were finished with it. And what you find out when you garden is that you need to nurture that garden. You need to be able to plant the seeds to bear the fruit that you want, the vegetables that you're looking for. And you actually need to like water this. You need to fertilize it. You need to figure out how to get rid of the bugs that eat away at the tomatoes and whatnot. And if you don't nurture the garden, and I learned this firsthand, it ends up looking a bit like this. What we're looking for is this when we're talking about culture, at least we are at Soccer Shots. And so I think the first thing that just has continued to come back to us at the leadership team is how do we be intentional in developing the culture that we want? Okay? And this picture helps illustrate that for us. I'd also say that culture it provides the rules that we play by. Okay? So one of the things that Andy Stanley talks about is clarity, and that people follow clarity. And one of the problems I think in a lot of organizations is that there's ambiguity about how do we behave. There's guessing, right? We watch cues. There's a little bit of trial and error. But if we're able to articulate and define our culture, we're able to better predict outcomes. And we'll kind of get into a little bit of how we apply that at Soccer Shots. I also think that it's an answer to this question. What's it like there? What's it like to work there? What's it like to play there, right? Most often you're not looking for, hey, the walls are nice and orange, we have pizza Fridays. It's like, no, the people are friendly. They're hardworking. It's cutthroat, okay? And most people, they don't know exactly that they're asking that question of like, what's the culture? How do people behave around there? So I think that definition of your culture allows people to answer this question of what's it like to be around there. I think this particular quote is important and helpful. Jim Collins wrote a number of books. You guys probably know him from Built to Last or Good to Great. And it's this. A cult-like culture can actually enhance a company's ability, and I say company, it could be any kind of organization, to pursue big, hairy, audacious goals, precisely because it creates the sense of being part of an elite organization that accomplishes just about anything. Okay? For us at Soccer Shots, that's incredibly important. We have some pretty big goals. While we are in 37 states and Canada, we only cover a portion of the country. Our desire, kind of goal, a 5-year mission is to serve 1 million unique children in the year 2022. And we are just at 300,000, so we have a lot more to go. And we understand that we require, in order to accomplish this type of goal, a culture that is cult-like. Now, you may cringe at cult-like. I did when I first read it, and I'd encourage you to kind of research that. But basically, what he means by that is that it's defined, that it's healthy, that it's, I'd say, directed. And so that's the type of culture that we're looking for. And quite frankly, it's a culture that's not for everybody. And we'll unpack that in a bit. When I was just giving some thought to this just the other day, I was thinking about, I was watching the Super Bowl. You guys saw the Super Bowl. And unfortunately, the Patriots won. Thank you. No, but the Patriots won, right? I have to admit, I was rooting against the Patriots. But what they've done is pretty incredible, right? They've won 6 Super Bowls out of 9, right? And what do you know about their team, right? Maybe you don't know a whole lot about football, but they're in a system and a structure where winning actually is penalized. The NFL has structured the system so that parity reigns, and yet they have been dominant with what some would say are lesser players. Tom Brady's pretty good, but you probably couldn't name too many more players that they have. And a big phrase that you hear that coming out of that camp is the Patriots way, right? The Patriots way. You kind of read about it and you understand that there's a certain way they do their business. There's a certain culture. There's a certain way that they behave around there. And if folks don't, they're out, okay? And we've also read about and seen organizations, teams that have maybe a bit of a flawed or spotty culture. Look no further than the University of Maryland and their football team not too long ago, right? There was unfortunately a player that perished whenever he was working out. And they uncovered that it was a culture of just heavy-handedness by the coach, uncaring, very intense to the point that it was inappropriate, demeaning, and there were some really serious consequences that came out of the culture that was allowed and that permeated that organization. So extremely important. Big reason for us at Soccer Shots is we've got some big goals to accomplish. We realize that culture is a significant part of that formula. So how do we define this culture? Okay, this simple graphic is helpful for us, and basically it introduces core values. So the belief system that I think culture is based on, and you see that the definition of core values: a small set of vital, timeless principles that define a group, your DNA. And what happens whenever you have a core group of core values and whatnot is that there's certain behaviors that come out of those, right? And we've already defined culture as how you behave around here. And I use the example of honesty. If I asked you to raise your hand if you believe honesty is an important value, I would venture to say everybody would raise their hand. And that's not really where it stops, though, right? So if we find a wallet that's not ours, filled with hundies, what are you going to do with it? It's pretty obvious. Most of us, I think all of us, would return it to the owner. But if somebody said, yeah, I'd return it to the owner, but after I took one out, put it in my pocket. You're like, whoa, absolutely, that's not honesty, right? That's a little absurd, but let me kind of draw this out a little further. So think about kind of your workplace or even your study group when you think about these. If a job needs to be completed, do folks stay late to complete it? If something goes wrong, do folks point the finger at someone else or do they own the mistake? When there's a problem, do folks find a solution? Or they just kind of say, there's a problem, somebody else needs to fix it. If someone is sick, does their teammate check in on them? What happens if a loved one dies of your group? Is there flowers delivered? If there's a need for confrontation, is it done? Is it passed over? Is it respectful? Is it blunt? You could go, there's an inexhaustive list of things that you kind of start putting together and say, yeah, we don't have a manual for that. That's not a process for that, right? And this comes to like, well then, what really are the guiding principles of the organization? And I would posit that core values is where it's defined, right? That's the belief system. But it certainly doesn't stop there. Where the rubber meets the road is in this second circle, in the behaviors. So let me just get to something that we've done in defining our culture. These are our core values on the back. You've got a copy there in the back of the sheet. And I'll admit that Jason, Jared, and I, we were involved in the early days of Soccer Shots. We did, like I think what most organizations do, or groups of people, there are like a lot of assumptions. And thankfully we have a long history. And so most of our assumptions about kind of how we behave around here were simpatico. They were consistent. And yet, as we started to add folks to our team, we realized, they don't really look at the world the same way we do. They don't have the same, they operate under different assumptions. And that, at times, proved to be problematic. So we did whatever what we were told to do. We put together, a list of core values. At the time, we had 9 of them. We put them on the wall, like every good organization does. And then we just let it sit there. And I remember distinctly, there was a time where there was a couple months into it. And I think we had maybe 6 or 7 people on the team at the time. And during a team meeting, I said, okay, guys, it's on the front wall. I want you to stand up, and I want you to turn your back to the core values. I said, could anyone just rattle off 2 core values? Crickets, chirping. Jason was in the audience. He came up with them. He helped come up with them. Couldn't anyone, right? I think I asked, does anybody know how many we have? And somebody kind of meekly murmured, 9. Yes, good. I'm like, all right, guys, sit down. I think at that moment I realized, I believe that we did have a culture. I don't think it was unhealthy, but I realized, man, we have not done our job. We have not been responsible in communicating what our culture is as it's defined by the core values. It prompted us to go through an exercise that we followed within the book Traction. It's by Gino Wickman. I put it on the back of that sheet. I would recommend reading it. It was very instrumental as we were thinking through a process on how to arrive at the core values. There's some other really great stuff in that book. But that exercise that involved Jason, Jer, me, and 2 key leadership team members at the time really prompted us to think about, okay, what is it that we want to be known for? What characterizes us? What's our DNA? And we boiled it down to these 6 core values. And you'll notice that, once again, we use the pronoun we. It's collective. And yet, at the bottom, there's a self-reflecting question that each one of us can ask ourselves to make a determination, hey, are we actually living within that core value? There's some supporting points there. And it's been helpful, and I'd say, dare I say, within our system, probably one of the most influential initiatives that we've launched at Soccer Shots. We were able to share these core values to our franchise system during a national convention, and most, if not all, of our franchise partners adopted them, recognizing the need for them. This becomes increasingly important for us. Not only do we have our team in Middletown, the franchisor, kind of the franchise support team, but we also have franchises across the country and through Canada. So how we behave around here takes on a whole new meaning for us at Soccer Shots, especially as our franchise partners are delivering the product, right? They're hiring coaches. The coaches are then training the children. You can understand sort of the trickle-down effect and how critical it is that we identify how we behave around here, and that we are kind of in lockstep with one another as it relates to core values. So once it's defined, that's actually the easy part. The hard part is the whole behavior thing. And I'm going to bring 2 examples to bear that hopefully illustrate how we're applying our core values. 2 recent examples. And one is found here. So this is a close-up of one of our youth jerseys. And they're handed out to enrollees whenever they register for Soccer Shots for the first time. It's kind of a big deal in that it takes a lot of coordination in that we take orders from our franchise partners. We place an order with our manufacturer. There's lead time. They manufacture these in Egypt. And they package them in plastic packets. They put hang tags on them. And they have various sizes. And they're sent then to us. We then have to send them out to our franchisees. It's a long process. And there was about over 100,000 of these that were produced and sent out most recently. And everything looked fine until we noticed that there is a little sticker right here. If you can see, it says boys size M. And we did not approve that sticker. Somebody in Egypt did. And they put them on all of the hang tags. You're like, no big deal. Except for the fact that we also have girls that participate in our program. And these are unisex. So a little bit of a problem in that don't want parents to be receiving these and they're like, oh, it's a boys jersey. We need to call the franchisee. I got a boys jersey. We need girls. So a bit of an operational snafu. Then you're like, well, okay, why don't you just tear them open and tear it off? Well, you could do that. It takes labor. And you've got a franchise community going like, what the heck? Come on, Soccer Shots. Get your act together. And unfortunately, all these landed. And there was a certain VP of ours, Julie Barton. She also is a Messiah grad. And she was responsible for this project. And there's a lot of other different parts of this project, but this one was pretty important. And she saw it, and what she could have done is throw up her hands and be like, it wasn't my fault. It was done in Egypt, they're packaged, this is the way it's gonna be. And yet what Julie did, without prompting, she got on the phone, she talked to our vendor, and she was able to negotiate, I would say, an offset. So she was able to negotiate credit for our franchisees and for us for this little mistake. And I look at that as an example of owning it. So if you look at some of the verbiage around owning it, it's taking the reins, taking the responsibility. And this may seem insignificant to you, but for us at Soccer Shots, there are things that happen like this throughout our kind of history. They happen kind of every day. And we've identified owning it, not just renting it, right? The difference between owning a house and renting a house is pretty significant in terms of your attitude. That's what we want from people in our community, people who work at Soccer Shots franchising and want it demonstrated. And this is just one example of one of our team owning it. And so that's a behavior that came out of a bit of our belief system, that particular core value. So here's another example. And this one is in the category of, what don't you tolerate? What are some things that maybe when it comes to the culture of your organization, it's really great to be able to honor people and highlight things that are I'd say, an example of good. This one falls in a different category. I'm going to read it to you. It's a Facebook post by one of our franchise partners in California. Now, the Facebook group page consists of all of our franchisees, so everyone who's involved with our system, key members of their team, and our team. So total of probably close to 200 people on this group page. And here's what he says. Details matter a lot. Our revenue report is incorrect. My team worked their butts off to hit their goal. I couldn't wait to open up the revenue report and share it with them. What a letdown. I'm so disappointed for this lost moment. We are candid. I'm so disappointed. An inaccurate annual report can't take away what the team worked so hard to accomplish. But a lack of attention to detail can take some sparkle off of it, okay? So, I read this, and I had a couple thoughts. First was, dang it, probably made a mistake. Somebody on our team, I think we made a mistake. Second was, we are candid. Now, if you read the self-reflecting question under we are candid, one of our core values, it's, how have I thoughtfully shared my perspective and have I asked the perspective of others? He sure shared his perspective and was able to say, I'm candid, really disappointed. Third thing was, he also offered that disappointment and the mistake that we had made in front of nearly 200 people of our community. That didn't set well. And I wrestled with okay, what do you do with this? Okay, I can let it slide. In fact, I have in the past. Truth be told, there have been things that I'm like, it's too much trouble. This is going to cause waves, whatever. But I read it and it stuck with me. I was like, you know what? I can't tolerate this. I don't want our organization to be one where folks who make mistakes are kind of like out in the open and finger wagging at it. So I called JB, and we had a video call because I think these types of conversations require this. And I went ahead and said, hey, JB, can you tell me your perspective? I read your disappointment. Can you give it in your words? Why? He kind of explained it, kind of understood, and I said, hey, listen, I understood. Are you cool with me sharing our perspective? And he said, sure. And one of the cool things is that he is bought into the core values. I would take issue, and I did, with kind of how he applied them. And I just said, hey, listen, you were candid publicly. Didn't really ask our perspective. Here's what happened. I kind of explained. We made a mistake. I'm sorry. And he did it in front of 200 people. If the roles were reversed, I don't think you'd want that. I would never tolerate that. And so while there was some contrition, I'm not going to say that there was like complete like 180. And time will tell if his behavior changes. But I think that's an example of like, hey, what don't we tolerate in our organization? And that for us was one where I had to say, hey, we are candid, and actually we care. So the one of the core values is like tone matters, right? People are more than their positions. So how to live it. So defining it is important. Living it, super important, right? What's the behavior? What's the outcome of that kind of belief system? I think the third is, how do you foster it? I think it's really important that we as leaders and even players within teams think about, if we understand how the culture is defined, how do you continually foster this? This is an active, participative type endeavor. It's not once and done. And so here's a few things, and I would say we have room to grow in this area. The first is like habitually highlight. Now, like everybody else, we have it on the wall. You can see it when you come in. But like the ones that we had before, they could collect dust and people could forget about them. But we are pretty intentional in making sure that, in our weekly newsletter goes out every week, but once a month there's something in there about our core values. We've had the last 5 conventions focused on a core value, so national gathering with all our franchisees, key members. Theme has been a particular core value, and we've talked about that at monthly team meetings. There's a section that we talk about core values. It's my responsibility in the position that I hold to make sure that that's done. So habitually highlighting, I think, your core values and I'd say wins, and I'll get to that in a second. The second thing is assess and address. When done right, I think that the core values become a lens that you look through when screening for people, right? That in fact, if you've identified what your culture is supposed to be and what you want it to be, you start looking for core value fits. And it's okay. There are some folks that aren't going to fit. And that doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means that those core values or the culture that you're trying to develop and nurture, they're not going to excel in. And that's fine. What you're looking for are people that fit that core value. And so core values, so assessment. So here are just a sample of questions that we've developed that we use for candidates that come into any position at Soccer Shots Franchising. We also use these whenever we're screening franchise candidates. Okay, so on the left-hand side are our core values. I don't have all of them there; they wouldn't fit. But here are a few sample questions. Okay, under we care. Can you tell me a time when you went above and beyond in a situation to show your coworker, supervisor, etc., that you care? What about we grow? What was the transition like from job A to job B? What did you do to prepare? Okay, we're your candidate. Can you think of a time where you improved a process that was already in place? How did you go about communicating it? Okay, and so forth, right? And so constructing questions, scenarios that actually vet individuals. So assessing candidates. I'd also say assessing and addressing things with current team members. Here's a snapshot of a portion of our quarterly review. And it's the tab that's focused on core values, where folks do a self-assessment. And what they do is they give themselves a 1, 2, or 3. This is called the People Analyzer out of the book Traction. And 3 is it demonstrates the core value most of the time. 2 is every now and then, and 1 is not very often. So you don't want 1s. We're looking for 3s mostly, and 2s are in there. And then this is really key. You give examples. You know, how have you behaved? How are the things that you're doing actually showcase that you are a core value fit? And then the supervisor does it, and then we have a conversation. So there's this calibration between the supervisor and the report, okay, on what is it that we're looking for. And I think that this is a critical kind of part in all of this, is that there's an ongoing refinement of what does it mean to be candid? What does it mean to be excellent, right? That's a big one for us. Pursuing excellence is well, what's excellent? I don't know. There's a wide spectrum there. And trying to figure out how do you calibrate that we're on the same page of what we mean when we say the words that are in our core values. So this is a pretty important tool that we use in the quarterly reviews. That's in addition to what we call quarterly rocks, as well as a job description evaluation. I'd say the third thing, and I'm a big fan of this, and I want us to do even more of this, is I think we need to make heroes. Make core value heroes of folks. It gives an opportunity for us to say, that's what we mean by the culture that we want, okay? And one way we do this that's really simple, but I think has been effective, and it's these called CV Matters. So all it is a 3x5 card, really practical. You can see that you have the name, the core value, and then a comment. It doesn't matter what position you're on in the organization, but if you've observed someone that has exemplified a core value, you scribble a note, okay? And then our standing 10, we have a standing meeting every Monday at 9 o'clock. Anybody that's in the office, you stand up, there's an agenda. It's things to celebrate, things you might want to know, and then questions. So that's kind of the agenda that we follow. And that first part, things to celebrate, is when folks are like, hey, I got a CV shout out. And in this case, I wrote something up for Julie for that particular situation that I explained with the hang tags. And it's just simple as that. And what you see, what started to happen, unprompted by us, is folks on the team started put those on their cork boards, right? Kind of like those little Buckeyes or little made a tackle, right? I thought that was pretty cool. And so it doesn't have to be a big ordeal when we're making heroes of folks. But I do think that there needs to be some tradition, some ceremony that allows us to say, oh, that's it. Good job. That's what we want. And that's done on a weekly basis at Soccer Shots. All right. Well, kind of in summary, I think for us, I've kind of tried to distill this. I think when it comes to culture, it's about defining it, right? It's have we sufficiently defined it so people at least begin to understand the words? And then it leads into living it consistently. Onus is on me. Onus is on ownership team, leadership team, but also the rest of the team to live it. And then it's foster it relentlessly. And these I put in kind of linear fashion, 1, 2, 3, but really they kind of, I think they combine. There's a little interchange there that as we live them out, as we foster them, it kind of refines the definition. It becomes a little more clear for folks. And yet, it does then get blurry sometimes, right? And you have to kind of clarify it again. And kind of say, no, this is what we mean when we say we are candid. No, this is what we mean when we say, pursue excellence. And I think it's a lot like just being in the weight room, I don't get there very often. But, it's important to kind of continue to lift and exercise in this way. You're never going to put all the weights on and be like, I'm done, figure that out. We haven't, and if you have, I'd love to talk to you about it. So there you go. There's a little bit of what we're working on at Soccer Shots. I think that culture is not a substitute. It works with a good strategy. It works with a great product. Okay? They work in combination with one another. But for us, it's a critical component to our organization. And I trust that it is with the organizations that you're involved with. I was going to, because we have so much, what kind of time do we have? No? Are we ready to wrap up? You got some time? How much time? 15. Great. So, because I've put you all out there as practitioners, and I believe you are, I've realized that, like, listen, you came to listen to me maybe, but I also know as I look around the room, there's a lot of folks who have thought about this issue of culture and that are in organizations where it is healthy, or maybe it's not. And so what I did is on the back of the sheet is there's a few discussion questions. And what I'd like to do, this is always like, operating here without a safety net, is I'd love to take about 5 minutes where you all discuss one or several of those questions, okay? And if there's anything that's like, aha, awesome, this is great, I'd love to bring it back up. I'd like to hear it, and maybe be able to share with the group. So 5 minutes of just conversation around this topic of culture, using those questions as jumping off points, okay? All right, and then at 5 or 6 minutes, I'll call everybody's attention, and then we'll share a little bit.
One of the reflections that we were talking about a little bit here was just the time that it takes to build culture, not necessarily the investment time, but the time in years. I'd be curious to hear from other people on this, or even from you, but I've seen that good culture usually takes an investment of time. And it's something that has iterations that come, you sort of define it at one point, and then you have to sort of redefine it, maybe based on your size, maybe based on the clarity that you as a leader have around who you are and where the organization is going. But that's one of the factors I think often we assume we can kind of find it in one step, in one shot, and then we're done. But it takes some time.
Excellent point. Yeah, I mean, we were just, Peter was making a comment about kind of the sub-points, and we created those core values, I don't know how many years ago, Jay, 6, 7 years ago. And now there are some sub-points that I would like to even change as a result of kind of the refinement that has gone on. So one thing under we own it, there's nothing about solutions oriented. And I'd really like to, because that's something we've identified as to own it is to find solutions. There's plenty of problems, but we really value that, and we didn't clearly articulate that within that particular core value. And there's a number of other examples. Any responses or comments? Because you said you wouldn't mind hearing from others about that. But I do think it takes time. Yeah, Mike.
It strikes me that culture will develop with or without leadership. Without leadership, you're going to have a culture that develops, but it may not be what you want it to be. And good leadership provides the framework for that. I think here at Messiah, one of the values, I think that every employee of Messiah, and probably most of the students would say, that the president has put forth is hospitality. We will be a place of hospitality. And that's been repeated, that's been demonstrated, and that's something I think that has just become part of our culture.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mike. I mean, there's just that picture of those gardens, something's going to grow. Something will. It's just, something's going to take root because people say things, they act, they behave. The question is it the way that you want it to be? And I think of a quote that Dave Brandt, so Dave talked to our group, came to a convention of ours a couple years ago in Philadelphia, and at the time he had left Messiah and was at the Naval Academy. And during his talk, and if you've heard Dave's pretty adamant about his beliefs, and he's definitely left a mark on this program. And he looked all of us in the eye, and he said, like, if you don't like your culture, it's your fault. Okay? If you don't like your culture, it's your fault. I was like, ooh, yeah, there's some things there that maybe we don't, like, and we need to address it, and we need to make sure that we're forming it in a way that we desire, and it's healthy for the organization. Good.
Okay, maybe one more question.
Question for you about the, so obviously the culture within your organization is incredible. How many levels deep do you go as far as making people aware of the core values? Like, because obviously the success of the program is amazing, but do the kids out in California, are their parents aware of the culture? Does that make sense? Like, do you take it, do you distill it to that, or disseminate the information to that population as well?
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Good question. So we invest a lot of our time and efforts with our immediate team. So Soccer Shots franchising, about 29, 30 folks in the Middletown area that work at SSF. We're also working at influencing the franchise partners. So kind of what I talked about when it comes to assessing and using them as a lens to evaluate, hey, are they a fit? What we're looking for folks that already embrace those, they identify with those. Maybe they haven't been able to articulate them exactly, but they're like, oh yeah, that's me. And we're like, oh yeah, that's you, that's us, great, this works. And so we're really working at, I'd say, continuing to reinforce that with the franchise partners that we have, and then having them equipped to influence their coaches and their team. Gang, I think we're up against the clock. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you guys taking some time this morning. Great to see you. Thank you.